One of the persistent complaints about Linux from users who are considering the switch from Windows is that installing software is supposedly harder on Linux than on Windows. The stereotype is that Linux requires command line incantations, configuration files, and specific knowledge that Windows users do not have to bother with. The stereotype was accurate in 2005. It has been progressively less accurate every year since. In 2026, there is a specific capability on modern Linux that makes installing Windows applications on Linux, in many cases, a single-click operation. Not just Linux applications, Windows applications. The specific tools and the specific mechanisms that make this possible have been refined over years, and the current state of the art is polished enough that the common claim that Linux is harder than Windows for installing software has inverted for a substantial category of cases. Installing a Windows application on Linux is, in many scenarios, easier than installing the same application on Windows. I want to walk you through what the capability is, how it works, what categories of software it applies to, and how a typical user can take advantage of it. The specific capability I am talking about is the combination of Flatpak, Wine, Bottles, and the specific tooling that the Linux community has built on top of these technologies. Each component contributes a specific piece to the overall experience, and the combination is what produces the one-click experience that I described. Flatpak is a packaging format for Linux applications that includes all the dependencies of an application in a sandboxed bundle. A Flatpak package can be installed on any Linux distribution that supports Flatpak, with no concern about whether the host distribution has the specific library versions the application needs. The Flatpak ecosystem includes a central repository called FlatHub, which hosts thousands of applications that are maintained, updated, and available for one-click installation. Wine is, as I have discussed in other videos, a translation layer that allows Windows applications to run on Linux. Wine has been in development for decades and has reached a level of maturity where it handles a wide range of Windows applications, including many that users depend on for daily productivity and gaming. Bottles is a management layer for Wine environments. Each bottle is an isolated Wine configuration tuned for a specific application or set of applications. Bottles handles the complexity of Wine configuration, which has historically been a pain point for new Linux users. Users select a bottle, choose an application from the supported list, and Bottles configures everything automatically. The combination of Flatpak, Wine, and Bottles produces an experience where a Windows application can be installed on Linux with roughly the same effort as installing a Linux application. The user opens Bottles, finds the application they want, clicks install, and the application is set up in an appropriate Wine environment automatically. The user does not need to know what a Wine environment is. The user does not need to configure anything. The user does not need to troubleshoot dependencies. The installation just works. The specific categories of software where this works well include a large range of productivity applications, creative software, games, and specialized tools. Microsoft Office, which is one of the most commonly requested Windows applications by Linux users, installs well through several paths, including through Bottles. Adobe Creative Suite installations have varying success, with some applications working well and others having specific issues, but the installation process itself is one click for the applications that work. Games that are not on Steam install through Heroic Games Launcher or Lutris with similar one-click workflows. Various enterprise applications install through dedicated scripts that handle the specific requirements. For this specific workflow, let me walk through what a typical user experience looks like. You are a Linux user who wants to install a specific Windows application. You open your distribution's application store, which is typically GNOME Software, KDE Discover, or a similar tool. You search for the application. If the application is available as a native Linux application, it is installed directly. If the application is available as a Flatpak, the Flatpak is installed. which handles all dependencies automatically. If the application is a Windows application that has a known good bottles configuration, you open bottles, search for the application, and install it through the one-click interface. If the application is more obscure, you might use Lutris or an installer script from the Lutris community repository. The entire workflow from wanting to install an application to having the application installed and usable is typically a few minutes. It does not require command line usage for most cases. It does not require reading documentation. It does not require understanding the underlying technology. Compare this to the Windows installation experience for the same applications. On Windows, you typically need to download the installer from the publisher's website, verify the download, run the installer with administrator permissions, navigate through the installer's setup screens, accept the license agreement, select installation options, wait for the installation, and potentially restart the system. The process is more involved than the Linux equivalent for most applications, though it is familiar to Windows users who have done it many times. The reasons the Linux experience is often smoother than the Windows experience include several factors. The package management systems on Linux are designed to handle the full installation workflow automatically, from dependency resolution through configuration. The Windows installation process, which has evolved over decades from older models, is less automated in practice. The Linux application repositories are curated and maintained, which means users are typically installing software that has been vetted. Windows installations from arbitrary publishers are less controlled, which means users need to exercise more judgment about what they install. For users who are skeptical that the Linux experience can actually be this smooth, I would suggest trying it. Install a mainstream Linux distribution, open the application store. Search for a few applications you use regularly. Notice how many are available as one-click installations. Install a few, notice how the installations work. The evidence for the claim I am making is not theoretical. It is directly observable on any modern Linux installation. There are specific cases where the Linux experience is less smooth than Windows. Some applications are not available for Linux at all, in which case no Linux installation is possible. Some applications are available but have specific issues that require manual intervention. Some applications require user configuration that cannot be automated. For these cases, the Windows experience is better or the Linux experience is specifically more work. I want to be honest about this. The claim is not that Linux is always easier. The claim is that Linux is often easier, and that the common stereotype of Linux being harder for installation is outdated for most practical cases. The broader observation I want to make is that the software installation experience is a specific example of the general pattern where Linux has quietly gotten much better than the conventional wisdom suggests. Users who formed their impressions of Linux from experiences 5 or 10 years ago have impressions that do not reflect the current state of the ecosystem. The specific improvements, including the maturation of package management, the availability of cross-distribution packaging formats like Flatpak, the refinement of Wine-based tools for Windows compatibility, and the polish of distribution-specific application stores have cumulatively transformed what Linux is as a consumer operating system. The transformation has not been accompanied by aggressive marketing. The Linux community does not have the commercial infrastructure to mount campaigns that reach mass audiences. The improvements are real, but are communicated primarily through word of mouth, through specialized technology coverage, and through the gradual accumulation of personal recommendations from users who have discovered the improvements themselves. This communication pattern is slower than commercial marketing, but it is also more credible because the recommendations come from people who have nothing to sell. For users who are curious about Linux, my recommendation is to try it, with specific focus on the installation experience. Install a distribution, install some applications. Notice what the experience is. The impression you form from actual use is more reliable than the impression you would form from reading about it or from assumptions based on outdated stereotypes. For users who are unlikely to switch but who are curious about what the experience is like, the observation is still worth making. The software installation experience on Linux, combined with the ability to run many Windows applications through wine and bottles, means that Linux in 2026 is a more capable software platform than many Windows users realize. The capabilities that Windows has, in terms of running Windows software, are matched or exceeded by Linux plus Wine for a growing range of applications. The specific advantages of Windows, in terms of breadth of commercial software support, are smaller than they used to be and continue to shrink. Subscribe for the next video, which is a specific walkthrough of installing 10 commonly requested Windows applications on Linux through bottles and related tools, including Microsoft Office, Adobe applications, specific games, and specialized utilities. The video includes the specific tools, the specific steps, and the specific troubleshooting for each application. And in the comments, tell me which Windows application you most want to run on Linux. I will address compatibility questions for the applications that come up most, because the specific needs of users determine whether Linux is viable for their specific workflows.